John with the Messianic Hebraic view of the gospel. And the focus is that picture of the kingdom. Amen, amen, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God going up and coming down on the Son of Man. And I know this came up a couple of times, I guess in discussion during the week, is that, we know that the Messiah is coming to reign, and not everybody likes that idea. Not everybody is going to receive that idea and receive the authority that he comes with, and they don't necessarily want to live under it. And some of those that are going to be fighting the hardest against it are going to be those who are the most religious in the way that we think about it. Because they don't recognize his authority, and we have this power struggle constantly going on between our will and his will, right? Y'all know what we're talking about? Y'all seen that before? It happens in us, and it happens individually, and it happens as a people, that we will always be rising up against what God is trying to do. We are also a stubborn and a stiff-necked people. That's just the nature. But we are getting glimpses of the Messiah and his reign and the kingdom coming in power. We're also getting glimpses of the resistance to that. We were looking at John 7 last week at the Feast of Tabernacles, and made that idea or the premise that really everything that happens following in chapters 8, 9, and part of 10, I'm more and more starting to think that those are also all events and conversations that are happening within this week of the Feast of Tabernacles. We know, and I know just in mainstream theology, we've always said that the Gospel of John is the least chronological in the way that it's organized. It's organized around the 7 signs and such as that. And in reality, I'm thinking more and more it's more organized around the feast, around the fulfillment of those. And the conversations that he has are about what they're talking about, what they're seeing, what they're engaging in during the feasts and such. And so a lot of these conversations in 8, 9, and 10 are thematically related to what you see in Tabernacles. And we started with John 7, now the Feast of Tabernacles was near. So it's setting that stage of this time of year, where we are at right now. And so we start with John chapter 8, where Yeshua is challenged by those that are coming with a legal case, a Torah-inspired case, and they want to know what his opinion is on it. There are even some parallels of what we're seeing ongoing in the nation's capital, these days, where they're interviewing, they're trying to get, the Supreme Court, they're trying to figure out what his judicial philosophy is. How is he going to make his rulings? What's his opinion going to be? And of course, there are those that are for him, there are those that are against him, and no matter what he says, they're still going to be for him or they're still going to be against him, right? Y'all notice that kind of pattern? It's just insane. So we've witnessed how crazy these kind of debates can get, even in our own country. And I just think that's kind of interesting here, is that we're seeing some of these things ongoing. It starts off, the last chapter ends with everyone going back to his own house. That was the last and the greatest day of the feast. Each one... Chapter 7 ends and it's as if they're leaving and going home. But Yeshua, he is going to the Mount of Olives. When else does he do that on a nightly basis? When else does he go out to the Mount of Olives when he's in Jerusalem? Isn't that Passover during the last week of his life? He comes into Jerusalem, he teaches, he goes out at night to the Mount of Olives, and stays there, comes back the next day. It's like this is the pattern that he sets for how he operates when he's in Jerusalem for the feast. He goes in, he does things in Jerusalem at the temple. At night he goes out to the the Mount of Olives. And so this is the same pattern. And whereas we read it and we may think that Tabernacles is over, in a lot of ways this is really just a conversation, I think, that's going on during the Feast of Tabernacles. It says, at dawn, he came again into the temple. So where it says everyone went to his own house, if Yeshua had gone to his own house, where would he have gone? Probably back to Galilee, right? He would have at least gone back up that way. But he has not gone anywhere. He's still in Jerusalem. He's still going to the temple. Yes?
I wonder if house could have been a sukkah.
His house could have been sukkah, yes. And I was wondering about that, but this verse, chapter 7:37, is the last and greatest day of the feast. So if that's the end of the day, they might be going back to their sukkah, but that would be the end of the feast at that point. Does that make sense? But we read that as if, okay, now Tabernacles is over, and now he's starting something else. But he hasn't gone anywhere. He's still in Jerusalem. He's still going to the temple in the morning. So it's really still connected, is the premise. So at dawn, he comes again to the temple. All the people were coming to him, so none of them have really gone anywhere. All the people are coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. Okay? This is exactly what happens in chapter 7. About halfway through the feast, Yeshua went up to the temple and began teaching. So it's like this is an example of one of the times that he went into the temple and started to teach. And these are the issues that he talked about. It says, the Judean leaders were amazed. How does this man know so much, having never been taught? Yeshua answered, my teaching is not from me, but from him who sent me. Okay? In the eyes of the people, when they're hearing him teach, what's their opinion of his teaching? Do they like it? Yeah. I mean, they're impressed. I mean, even the Judean leadership, even the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the elites of the teachers are like, man, where did this guy get his education? He didn't come to us. He doesn't have a degree from Harvard or Yale or something else like that we recognize. So who taught this guy to teach like he does? And it was proposed last week that, as they memorize Scripture and memorize the Torah, somebody proposed that what he was teaching was essentially reciting the Torah to such an extent that he did not make mistakes at all. And he could recite, could the living word recite the written Torah? Yeah. Is the living word, the living Torah, going to make a mistake in reciting the written Torah? No. So that would make sense that he would be quoting, extensive passages, and he doesn't need the scroll right in front of him. And they're like, man, this he's not missing anything. So whatever it is, yeah.
I was just going to make a point of that. When I saw that, he said he went in and he sat down and began to teach. And what that means is, usually, or most always, when they taught Torah, they would sit down. The phrase "sat down" means teachers teaching Torah, and
they would typically stand to read, but sit to teach. Mm-hmm.
What I can't understand is, apparently these are not the ones that were following him around finding fault with.
Not in the open country, so to speak, because that was one of the discussions that we had, a bit of it last week. They won't even go in person to listen to him. That's what Nicodemus says at the end of chapter 7. The guards come back. They had tried to arrest him, and they were working their way through the crowd. And in the time it took them to get from the back of the crowd to where he's sitting, they had heard so much that they were like, I ain't touching this guy. But Nicodemus then stands up and says, our Torah doesn't judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he's doing, does it? And then they answered, you aren't from Galilee too. You search and see that no prophet comes out of Galilee. So it's as if none of them have actually gone to listen to Yeshua themselves. And that's because that would make him look better They would have to be sitting under his teaching. They would have to be coming under him, and they want Yeshua to come under their authority. So most of them have not gone even to listen to him for themselves. They've heard the reports of other people that have brought it in. Nicodemus is one who has followed the Torah and gone and talked to him back in chapter 3. So anyway, here they are. He's sitting in there. He's sitting down to teach. And John chapter 7 is there. And the people are responding, at least in some way, to what he is saying and what he is doing and what he is teaching. And his authority and his honor is rising. Some of their honor, some of their status might be declining, because they want to make sure that the people still see them, the leadership, as we're the better experts of the law, not this guy. We don't know where he even got his education. They still need to look to us and see that. And so they bring this case to him. The Torah scholars, the Pharisees, bring in a woman who'd been caught in adultery. And after putting her in the middle, they say to Yeshua, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of committing adultery in the Torah." So they're bringing him a legal case for him to judge. Moses commanded us to stone such women, so what do you say? And then we get their motive. They were saying this to trap him so that they would have grounds to accuse him. Are they really interested in justice? Are they really interested in living out the Torah correctly? Is that their primary purpose? No. Yeah, they're not really, those are not their goals. Their goals are finding grounds to accuse him. They're trying to trap him. And this, again, goes back to this is where I was trying to recreate that. Their motive is not justice or righteousness. Their motive is entrapment and trying to discredit him. They were listening to Yeshua too much. And this one struck me. If they were willing to try to entrap Yeshua, do you think they would be willing to entrap the woman? Yeah, because she's a nobody as far as they're concerned. If they're willing to try to entrap and discredit Yeshua, they have no qualms about trying to use somebody as a foil or use somebody to get to him. Now, again, do we see that in our nation like right now? Yes, we still do the same kind of stuff. You have somebody who's an important public figure, you go find some random unknown person to go out there and have a basis of accusation. We're witnessing that right now. And I'm not talking about her as a person or nothing else like that. But that's just the pattern. We still do the same kind of stuff. And do the Democrats really care about the woman that's making the accusations? No. As soon as this thing's over, she's going to disappear, and they're not going to care one whit what happens to her. Okay, it's that kind of thing. So they're willing to entrap Yeshua. They're also willing to entrap her. And that's one of the questions. So they're bringing him this situation. They're not really interested in justice. They're not really interested in righteousness, because when you look at what does the Torah say, two verses, this one's in Leviticus, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, who commits adultery with his friend's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress should surely be put to death. Okay? Then there's the next one. Suppose a man is found lying with a married woman, then both of them are to die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. So you are to purge the evil from Israel. Okay? So again, what's missing, or who is missing? One, the man is. The commands, who do they start with? Do they start with it's the woman's fault? Well, when you read this, who does it start with? Does it start with the woman, or does it start with the man? She's the one that's getting it, yes. But the command puts the primary responsibility, puts the first mention kind of thing. This is about you, the man. What are you doing? All right. How are you approaching this situation? How are you approaching this woman? Ultimately, he is the first one that's should be held accountable.
Was Adam the one really held accountable? Even though Eve didn't?
Yes. Even though Eve took, the bite of the fruit, Adam was still held responsible. The command went to him. He was supposed to ensure and protect her by helping her not break it.
They both got punishment.
Yes.
But yeah.
They both received the punishment.
The burden was on him.
So again, they show up and they only have her. And so right off the bat, are they keeping Torah? No, they're not.
They said that they found her, she was committed in the act.
So they're
co-conspirators.
Yeah. If they're in the act, then there has to be another player in the act. And that guy is conveniently not present. And part of me even wonders if he's one of the men that's in the crowd that has organized and orchestrated this situation. So both men and women are supposed to come in, to be held accountable for the situation. And this goes back to chapter 7, verse 19. Hasn't Moses given you the Torah, yet none of you keep it? If they were keeping Torah, both the man and the woman would be there. Then he says later in verse 24, do not judge by appearance, but judge righteously. What's this whole thing? He is trying to get them. If you're going to try to live the Torah and all this stuff, you're judging by these appearances. You're judging by this setup that you're doing and playing around with it to make yourself look better. You're not judging righteously. This is not a righteous situation. They don't really care about whether this is righteous or not. And so they're trying to trap him and catch him in these things. And so they basically believe that any answer he gives, this is their thinking. They're wanting to set up the situation, and you probably have met people like this or seen situations like this, that no matter whether he says yes or whether he says no, they still got him. Right? Y'all know people that try to set up situations like that? If you say do it, you're in trouble. If you say don't do it, you're still in trouble. So they think they've got the bases covered as for what his options are. You see that in legal situations, where a lawyer asks the witness a question and they start trying to give an explanation. They say, no, yes or no. Just keep it to yes or no. Don't go off into your explanation. Don't go off into your excuses or your justifications or your reasoning. Yes or no. And it's like that question that you hear sometimes thrown out. So, when did you stop beating your wife? Y'all heard that one before? Well, how do you answer that without acknowledging that, well, I've been doing it at some point, right? It's a trick question to try to get you in trouble. That no matter how you answer, that's why I don't think I would enjoy being a lawyer or being those people that play those kind of games or being on the receiving end of it, because that would drive me nuts, having to be careful about every little detail. So, but they think they give him no option. If he says no, don't stone her. What would they accuse him of? What's that? Well, you obviously don't care about Torah, because the Torah says that such a woman should be stoned. Okay? So if he says no, clearly he's violating Torah. If he says yes, what's the accusation going to be? What's that? Well, okay, that's one aspect, yes. According to Torah, he's not a judge, because Moses had set up various systems, various levels of leadership to try to handle and decide cases of the Torah and of breaking the law. He says that in Exodus 18, 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles and such, 19 and such. There's several instances where they set up a system of legal judgment and determination. In fact, there was such a court in Jerusalem, essentially right down the street. If they cared about justice, if they cared about righteousness, if they cared about all that, where would they take her? Right down the street. You know, it's like there's the police precinct a couple of blocks away, but rather than they caught a criminal in the act, and rather than take him down to the police, they take him down to the local mob boss or something else like that, and say, okay, he did this. What do we do with him? I'll break his legs. You know, something like that. Take care of it. But they're not the legal authority to make that kind of judgment. Yes.
So, we don't understand. They brought her into the temple?
Depends on where he in the temple complex.
Yeah, but I mean,
because they would bring people before in front of the tabernacle to get things answered, right? Even they would bring women before the tabernacle for the whole jealousy ceremony and stuff like that. So they're probably careful on that issue. So wherever he's set up and teaching, they're bringing her in.
I'm surprised they allowed him to speak.
Well, I mean, he's not necessarily making a big show of things. You know, they have those steps and those stairs, Solomon's colonnade. It's a pretty large area. You know, he's sitting down and a crowd is gathering. He's not sitting down necessarily in a place that would disrupt all of their ceremony or the other things that the leadership is doing. He's just sitting down, he's starting to talk and to teach, and a crowd is gathering. And lots of other people were doing the same thing. So that was fairly common. The leadership in Jerusalem probably hated it, because you have all these country hick teachers going to show up in Jerusalem and try to, they show up a few times a year, trying to get attention, trying to steal disciples, trying to make some money, whatever else. That's probably how they look at it. They're muscling in on what should be our turf. So they don't like it. But in any event, so yeah, he's violating Moses, who set up these legal systems, and he's not authorized to do that. So if he makes an answer of any kind, they could accuse him of, you're not authorized to make that decision. And then as you mentioned, they would be in violation of the Romans. They're asking for what kind of penalty toward her? They're asking for the death penalty. Okay? Look over in John chapter 18. Just a few chapters later. John chapter 18, verse 31. This is during the crucifixion. Pilate is, he's coming out to them. He's asking them, what charge do you bring against this man? They answered, if he weren't an evildoer, would we have handed him over to you? Then Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him by your Torah. And the Judean leaders responded, we are not authorized to put anyone to death. This was happened so that the word Yeshua spoke would be fulfilled, signifying what kind of death he was about to die. So they were, when it comes to matters of the death penalty, they were not given permission to just go and do that. Well, they would be accused of being a mob. Like Stephen in Acts chapter 7 and 8 and such. And this was something that I found out of Josephus and such, that there was a period in AD 62 where the Roman procurator had died. The new one had not shown up. yet. Albinius, I think was his name. And again, I'm trying to read chicken scratch here. Hananiah, Ben Hananiah, the high priest at the time, during that period where there was no Roman authority, he rounded up all of his political enemies and started whacking them off and killing them. And he was trying to do it before that guy got there. It's AD 62. That's what. So he started executing a good number of people, and it's believed this is the time when James is killed. James, the half-brother of Yeshua, is killed at that time because he didn't have to ask permission for the death penalty.
So this was 8 years before the 70 AD.
Yes. I mean, unrest is growing and brewing and all that kind of stuff. Now, so that was a pretty big thing. So depending on how the situation works out or how Yeshua gives an answer, he would be violating Torah, he would be going against Moses, or he'd be going against Rome. It was between a rock and a hard place kind of situation. And they thought they had him grounded. And so then we start reading what happens next. So they were saying this to trap him, but Yeshua knelt down and started writing in the dirt with his finger. And so he's doing that, and they keep pressing him. They kept on asking him. They kept harassing him until he gives an answer. He stood up and he said, "The sinless one among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Now, what did he not do in giving that answer?
He didn't say yes or no.
He didn't say, well, did he deny Torah and the authority or the right punishment? No, he didn't. He didn't deny that at all. He didn't say, don't do it at all. Didn't even bring up the man. Right? He didn't. He also did not usurp the authority of the courts, nor did he claim charge of her execution. Because what happens, like with Stephen, who was in charge of that moment? Saul, who eventually became the Apostle Paul, right? He stood and overseed everything. And they laid down their cloaks at the feet of a young man named Saul, right? That's how they determined or signified that he was in charge. So rather than standing and pronouncing judgment, what is he doing? Yes, but he's not standing for most of it. Most of the time he's kneeling or he's down on the ground. He's not standing as the authority. He's not standing as the one, I'm in charge, but he stands up and gives a defense, but he puts all of the whole situation on them.
I heard from somebody, I don't remember who it was, that they believe that there is a verse in Deuteronomy or somewhere about they will be like your name in the dust in the wind.
I don't think I have it. I know, but I don't think I have it up there. Jeremiah 17. Yeah, he was tweeting. It was early in the morning.
Anyway, the man said that he thought that he probably wrote the name of each one of them.
17:13 of Jeremiah. And I'm gonna go back up a little bit to verse 9. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and incurable. Who can know it?" Okay. I, Adonai, search the heart and try the mind, to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. As a partridge that broods over her young that she did not lay, so is the one who gets wealth unjustly. In the middle of his days it will abandon him, so at the end he will be a fool. Throne of glory on high from the beginning, place of your sanctuary. Adonai, you are the hope of Israel, and all who forsake you will be ashamed. And again, this is an honor-shame conversation. They're trying to diminish Yeshua and elevate themselves. He says, all who forsake you will be ashamed. Those who depart from you will be written in the dirt. For they have forsaken Adonai, the fountain of living waters. And of course, living waters is part of the conversation that they start having at various places. But they'll be, rather than being written in the book of life, they're being written in the dirt, and that's the end of them. And this is all about corruption and twisting of justice and all of those things. So they are departing from Torah and the ways of Adonai. Because again, we've already established, if they were caught in the act, there should be a second player. And he's not there that they know of or that they're pointing out.
Again, we are seeing this happen.
Yes. But he essentially is putting all of the moment on them. Okay? He put the action of execution in the hands of the ones bringing the accusation. He put the burden not on her and her sin, but on them and theirs. On them and their sin. Because, those are it's a good old boy kind of a network. Don't you think they all knew what each other had done? Playing around, talking around, bragging about stuff that they've gotten away with. Every single one of them would have known each other's baggage. And so if any one of them would have picked up a stone to throw it, one of the other guys probably would have said, "Ben, what are you throwing that rock for? I know what you did. You were bragging about it just yesterday."
Because it says in verse 10, I searched the heart. I tried to love.
Mm-hmm.
Give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. Yeshua knows exactly.
He knows, yeah. The Gospels say that several times, that He knows what they're thinking. He knows their heart. It's the Lord who knows their heart. And of course, He knows all that stuff. Their name is written in the dirt because they have forsaken the ways of the Lord. And so they have. Now,
Somebody sent me a verse out of Deuteronomy to deal with false accusers.
yes.
And I forgot who it was.
Well, every matter is supposed to be established by 2 or 3 witnesses, right? They have 2 or 3 witnesses. But there's also a verse that says, Deuteronomy 21, that says the person who is falsely accusing, if they make a false accusation and the people investigate it, the judicial system investigates, and it's determined that they are lying, then the penalty that they wanted to put upon the one they accused happens to them. So whatever it is they are making the accusation of, then that gets turned around and put on them. So they're wanting her to be stoned if it's determined that they are the ones doing the lying and bearing false witness, then that the Torah says they should be stoned. And of course, he says, let the one who is sinless one among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. All of their sin, they were sinners, right? And what's the penalty for sin? Any sin. Isn't death? Yeah, the wages of sin is death. Yes. Yeah.
The reason that they are to go ahead and kill the person that's wanting the other person killed or whatever is done is to purge the evil from the land. Right. So that people that hear and they won't be making false accusations.
Right. So, and we don't have much of a recourse about false accusations. It's hard in our legal system to gain justice over someone who has lied. There is probably nothing that Kavanaugh can do as far as getting his name back toward the accusers that have come forward. Because they were very careful about libel and not putting it in print or some other things. They've been careful about the kind of nature of accusations they have made, so he probably won't be able to take them to court. And it would look bad anyway, right? Yes, Gabriel. Deuteronomy 19? 19:18. So, okay, we were off on that just a little bit. But, so that's the situation. He put it back on them. And he did not claim charge of the judgment. Because, again, if you think she's guilty and you think you are the sinless one who can throw a stone at her, then you do it. You make that judgment. He's putting it all back on them. Now here's the other catch. Who's the only one in that crowd that is qualified given that statement? Yeshua is. Yeshua is the only one qualified standing there to accurately, faithfully execute judgment because he's the only one that does not have sin. So he is disqualifying all of them, including the courts right down the road, if that's going to be the standard. And doesn't he talk about that? He talks about that back in chapter 7. And see, this is where I don't have all my notes ready. Or was it back in chapter 6? Anyway, he talks about that when he judges, his judgments are right. And his judgments are true, and so they are always going to be consistent. And he says back in verse 24, he says, "Don't judge by appearance, but judge righteously." He is throwing it back in their face about all of this. And can you imagine, he who is without sin, let him be the first. Don't you think he kind of let that sink in just a little bit? Like, who's going to be the first one to take action? You all know the Torah. You're standing here having broken the Torah, and you're essentially bearing a type of false witness. She may very well have been caught in the act. And I don't think he's denying that. But he drew them in and made them examine themselves and whether or not that should work out. So, continuing on.
Before you continue on,
yes.
You made the assumption that you think it's a possibility that Yeshua was writing their names in the sand.
No, she said that. He's writing in the dirt.
Possibility. Yeah,
that's a possibility. I've heard that before. He might have been writing that verse in the dirt. We don't know. We can speculate that.
I was wondering. Okay.
Scripture back to Scripture.
Yeah.
And
whatever he wrote, it brought enough to mind that they'd better be very careful how they move forward. And it was enough to spook them. Let's just put it like that. And so,
I think it's a God thing that we're studying it today.
Okay.
I think we've been saying all week that God would show Psalm 35. God would show confusion in their camp. And I think he did to some degree when they went back. They didn't want the public to hear what was going on behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see how it all plays out. But we're living in a time where this kind of stuff is going on right now. That's just interesting. Then he knelt down again and continued writing in the ground, and I've seen whole sermons based upon what he wrote, and they have no way of knowing what he wrote. But now when they heard, but it's not necessarily what he wrote, but it's what he said. It's when they heard. Or maybe if they're looking at the Scripture and if they consider reading the Scriptures, hearing, Shema Yisrael, you're hearing from God. So whatever he wrote and whatever he said, when they heard that, they began to leave one by one, the oldest ones first, until Yeshua was left alone with the woman in the middle. Why do you think it was the oldest ones first?
I was wondering if there was any of those older men that was there when Jesus was 11 years old.
Some of them probably were.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, he would have. These guys probably would have been there when he was 12. Some of them. The oldest ones first were what now? They had more sin to be reminded of. They had more wisdom, right? They weren't necessarily all. A lot of times it's the ones that are leading the mob and the Antifa and all those other types of anarchist type of groups. They have older people who organize things, but they let the younger people bear the brunt of the violence and the passionate stuff. And again, we still see exactly the same pattern. The older ones know how to control and manipulate the emotions of the younger. And they're more likely to buy into the emotional, the excitement of the event. That was ice? Okay. And so the older ones are like, okay, he got us. Remember, they thought they had orchestrated this situation to where whatever he answered, they could accuse him. And when he comes back and he says that, what do you think the look on the older ones' faces were? It was one of those kind of moments where they're just like, ugh, didn't think about that one. Well, I'm sure conviction was a part of it. But I think he also gave the one answer they hadn't thought of. And again, that goes back to like when he was 12. He shows up in the temple. They were amazed at the kind of answers that he was giving. And see, that was how they would learn. That's how they would teach. They would ask one another questions. And they would prove their superiority by having a better question. If teacher, let me say, what do you say about this? So they say, well, let me ask you something first. And if you can answer my question, then I'll answer your question. You see that about how he does with John the Baptist and such. He comes back and he says, well, John the Baptist, was he from God or from men? And they say, well, if we say this, he's going to say that. And if we say this, he's going to say that. So we don't know. And he says, well, okay, then I'm not going to answer your question. Right? That's how they played that out. Yes. It's the Hebraic method, not the Socratic. Yeah. So that's the culture and the way that they would engage one another on a intellectual, philosophical, collegiate type of a level. And so he comes back, and they're trying to catch him in this, and he gives the answer that they didn't think of. And again, they're thwarted in their efforts. And when they heard, they began to leave until Yeshua was left alone with the woman in the middle. Now, again, who is the only one qualified to throw a stone at her, given his qualification? He is. Would he be right in doing so, based upon what we know? Sure. Okay. And this is where the things change. Now he stands up. He's still been kneeling on the ground, right? He was not the one in charge. He was not the one standing in judgment over all those men. He was letting them be in judgment over her, but over themselves first. It's kind of like what he talks about with communion. And you take the Lord's Supper. Each person, before you take the Lord's Supper, should what? Examine yourself. All right? Even when you go in to try and bring discipline to a brother who is wayward, be careful lest you do not fall. Right? That you don't get caught up in the same kind of stuff that they're doing. You have to examine yourself before you start trying to speak into somebody else's life, kind of a thing. Yes?
If he was writing their names, which would make sense, in terms of Scripture speaks to that.
Yes, but having their names written in the dirt.
The idea of him writing the older ones first, because he looks back down and he keeps writing.
Yeah.
He's not done putting their names in the dirt.
Yeah.
And the list starts with the oldest.
And it starts getting longer. They see their name written first. Yeah, that's a good point. But then, so it's at this point that he stands. He stands. And he's standing in a place of, he is now the authority. He is the one who is pronouncing the judgment here. All right? So he is authorized essentially to do so. Straightening out, Yeshua said to her, "Woman, where are they? Do no one condemn you?" So what is required in order to make a judgment? It must have 2 to 3 witnesses. Does he have that anymore? No. So can he make a judgment of Torah against her and stone her? No. The accusers are gone. So for him to stone her at this point, would that be a violation of Torah? Yeah. Because he has no witnesses. All right? And so, no one, sir, she said, then neither do I condemn you. We have no witnesses to say what they say happened really happened. We have no corroborating evidence. We've been hearing a lot about that. We have nothing on which to establish the truthfulness of what has been said about you. And I am very thankful that God is like that he is somebody who, now, is there anything that he's not aware of? Right? But we see, and even in the courtroom of God, we have somebody who is constantly accusing us. Satan literally means what? The accuser. He is the accuser of the brethren. So he is constantly trying to make accusation against us. But Satan is how many witnesses? 1. And so we have one who speaks against us, but we also have one who speaks for us.
We overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the testimony of our mouth, and we love the Lord more than we do our own mind.
Yeah. We have one who speaks against us. We have one who speaks for us. And that, it's not that we're not guilty, right? We are guilty. That's not the issue. But the one who speaks for us is greater than the one who speaks against us. And we are covered by that righteousness. We are covered by the blood of the Lamb. And so, what's that? Heaven and earth, yeah. That's true. I mean, and really, we would stand against ourselves. We would testify against ourselves. There's no pleading the fifth, I don't think, in the courtrooms of heaven. Because I don't think we would be able to not confess the truth. But we have one who speaks for us, and that is more than enough. But so neither do I condemn you, Yeshua says. Go and sin no more. Now, is he denying? Does he know whether she did it or not? Yeah, he knows. And he also knows. Yeah. I'm again of the mind that man was probably one of those standing in the crowd, and he probably wrote his name in the dirt. I can pick you out. You might be hiding there amongst all those other men, but yeah, you first. But he's not denying that she was in sin, but he is also saying this is where you have a moment to change. This is where you have an opportunity of mercy and grace being extended to you, because we know this whole situation has been a sham. Right? And that's actually some of the things, this whole question and situation, we get that kind of stuff. How many people do y'all know when they find out that you're keeping Torah or the feast and all this kind of stuff, and they just, like, some of them can't wait to find something to come and ask you about because they want to get you engaged in some kind of argument, conversation, to trip you up or try to catch you, trap you, make you look bad, right? This is one of those kind of moments. And one of the things that Paul says to Timothy is very similar. In 1 Timothy, he talks about not getting caught up in all that kind of stuff. Not getting caught up in all those kind of arguments. He says, as I urged you when I was leaving for Macedonia, stay in Ephesus to direct certain people not to pass on different instruction, different Torah, or to pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. These give rise to useless speculations rather than God's training, which is in faithfulness. How much do we see people arguing over, what issues do we see people arguing over? What day is the Sabbath? What calendar do we use? What kind of food? How to say the name? Are we Jewish or are we Gentile? Or do we have Jewish blood somewhere in our background? Is it Nephilim? Are they giants? Or are they something else? We get so caught up in all of these little things that really don't contribute to our testimony and to our witness. He says it again in chapter 4. He says, in pointing these things out to the brothers and sisters, you'll be a good servant of Messiah Yeshua, nourished in the words of faith and the sound teaching that you've been following, but avoid godless myths and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourselves in godliness, in righteousness. And, of course, what defines righteousness? The Torah does, right? So we are witnessing so much of this passage in our country right now. And we as a people can get so caught up in the same kind of things. But it's just an amazing thought of how Yeshua engages. He's not unfaithful to the Word. He's very consistent with the Word the whole time through. And everything he does is upholding the Torah. And that is the standard by which he approaches us. But he also knows that the Torah makes a way for the offerings and the sins to be covered by the blood. That's also keeping Torah. It's not pretending that we don't have sin, but it's saying, I'm making a way for your sin to be dealt with.